In the end game of all this, of course, with mass inflation is we'll all be millionaires, but we'll be poor.
This is Dunnigan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs. Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We have a returning guest. Jim Rawles is the founder of survivalblog.com. He's also a New York Times best-selling author, both fiction and nonfiction. He's joining us this Friday, June 18th, 2021. Jim, thanks for coming back on Liberty and Finance, formerly Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you so much for having me on.
We have had quite a time over the past year and a half. Everyone's been through more than they imagined we would be going through. Some people that have been waiting a long time for a major disruption have said, yeah, I expected this, just didn't know it would come in this exact form, packaging, and timeline. But the fact that people are now moving en masse, fleeing in many cases urban areas or what are less liberty-loving states for red jurisdictions where they are upholding constitutions, that sort of thing, has been quite a phenomenon, and we've been told it's happening. A lot of the states that haven't been upholding people's individual rights are losing significant numbers. But people who are still haven't made their move are asking, is it too late? Did they miss the boat? Is the markets being bid up to where they're just stratospheric and now we're in a bubble in those desirable destination areas? Or has the map of what you consider to be the most desirable destination area significantly shifted as we've learned more, both because of the action of governors in specific areas or just the policies that have emerged or just the way things have played out? So could you bring us up to date on your latest thinking on strategic relocation?
First, in answer to your question about whether it's too late, no, I don't think it's too late. If anything, property values in the rural inland areas are still lagging far behind what you see in the coastal states. So anyone who has any equity whatsoever in a property in a more populous blue state, they can turn that equity into a lot more square footage or acreage in a red state in the interior. So it's not too late. I believe that what we're seeing right now is actually just the beginning of a long-term trend where we're going to see, it's almost tribalization of our society, where people are fed up with the blue states. They're moving to red states for more individual freedom and more economic opportunity. And the divide between those states is going to become more and more pronounced. You see that a lot in places like Texas and Colorado, and even just the difference between the big cities of California versus the Central Valley and the Sierra Nevadas and Northern California. So it's a long-term trend. We're just seeing the beginning of it. And the real estate boom, I think, is going to continue for at least a year because I think the Federal Reserve is going to keep interest rates low. The thing that's probably going to come back and bite them, of course, is that they'll lose control of interest rates. And as they rise, mortgage rates will go up and people will be less and less able to afford to buy property simply because they won't be able to come up with enough money to meet the monthly payments at the higher interest rates, so they won't qualify for loans. So I do encourage all your viewers and listeners to think seriously about this. If you've thought that you might want to move out of a blue state, don't hesitate. This summer may be your last chance to do so at reasonable prices because the entire national real estate market really is on fire right now. The number of listings that are out there is pretty small, even in the rural areas, and properties often sell within a week, and often with multiple bids. So if you're in the situation where you can move, I recommend that you go ahead, seek work, or plan to retire early and make the move. Get pre-qualified for a loan if you can't do it with cash, and when you see the right property, jump on it.
Also, turning our attention to the upcoming expected Great Reset. We've been talking about a financial reset for the better part of a decade. Certainly, people thought that the global financial collapse of 2008, 2009 was going to cause that, but the powers that be were able to keep afloat at least most of our financial edifice through unprecedented amounts of liquidity and debt creation and so on. And that's just amped up just tremendously, like a hockey stick in the last year here in terms of creation of fiat currency all around the world and increase in debt. And also all kinds of things, buying up corporate junk bonds and repo market liquidity injections nightly by the Fed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What is your outlook for major signposts of a Great Reset, and what do you think the elements of that are that you're anticipating?
Well, we're already seeing the Great Reset being implemented. And of course, the COVID pandemic was the key enabler for that. But it's very clear that the Great Reset is a mechanism for instituting some pretty key elements of the leftist agenda. And that includes degrading our property rights and our personal privacy. They also want to transform local schools by means of federal programs and federally dictated curriculum. And if we step back and look more overarchingly, what they really want to do is destroy national sovereignty and the protection of our nation's borders. The Great Reset kind of puts into practice everything that I warned my readers about with Agenda 2030, and that later morphed into what they called Agenda 21. And their goals with Agenda 21 and the Great Reset with this are pretty clear. It means a sort of collectivist transformation of our economy. They want to transform the labor market, and they want to destroy private property. And at its core, what they really want to do is break down the traditional family unit. And they're already well down the road to eliminating personal privacy. And they want to control really all dissemination of information. And that includes, of course, social media. And they've nearly won that whole campaign. That's because through shadow banning, outright banning, demonetization, and search engine result manipulation, they've effectively marginalized anyone who disagrees with their views. And at a more fundamentally, a real basic level, they want to change our cities, depopulate the rural areas, and create larger corporate farms. That's part of the Great Reset. That's part of their real global view. They want their whole socialist utopia, and they don't want to let anyone get in their way. They really want to also reset healthcare. And that, of course, quite predictably means centralization. They want to you and some of your listeners may have heard to what they refer to as death panels. And that's basically where more bureaucrats would decide who's worthy of any, life-saving medical treatments and who will be shunted off to just quietly perish. And I must also mention that part of the reset will come in the form of eliminating personal financial privacy. And the mechanism there will be by the introduction of sovereign cryptos. Once the governments replace cash that's essentially anonymous and opaque with their own cryptocurrencies that are under their full scrutiny and absolutely transparent to what's going on, that'll keep every transaction will be fully tracked, fully taxable, and that will be really how they'll complete their control grid.
Some of the elements of what you just talked about are already evident. We've seen messaging come out consistently and on an increasing frequency about basically reiterating that statement that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, telling the next generation you don't want the hassles of home ownership and all the cares that come with that and the burden of a mortgage. You just want to be able to have a carefree lifestyle and just be a renter and let somebody else worry about all those things. And you don't want to do the dirty work of growing your food and all that. You just want that to be provided for you. So all of these messages, can you speak to the psychological messaging that's being used to convince the next generations that this is all desirable? This is what they should want. They shouldn't want to be sovereign. They should want to be dependent.
Yeah, when you said all that, I couldn't help but be reminded of H.G. Wells's novel, The Time Machine, and the division of society between the Morlocks and the Eloi. And the Morlocks were like, oh, we'll provide everything you need. You can have a happy life, and all your needs will be met, and you can have a carefree life, and it'll be paradise. Anyone who's familiar with that novel and the movies based on that novel will know that the Morlocks actually were essentially cannibalistic, and they viewed the Eloi tribe as their cattle. And when you come right down to it, the folks that are engineering the Great Reset look at us as human cattle, or at least chattel. They want to set up a control grid where they control everything. We are basically just, mindless worker bees, and they end up with the fruits of our labor, and they control us through various mechanisms to the point where we have no real freedom of thought, no volition, no private property, no private enterprise. We're just cogs in the machine.
This is not a new phenomenon. We've seen a trend since the Great Society. Well, I guess the institution of the Social Security after World War II, the Great Society of the 1960s. Anything that's considered this compassionate government nanny state programs, which have increased, and now it's more than 50% of U.S. households are dependent upon some form of handout on a daily, weekly, monthly basis from the federal government to survive. Is there any turning this around in your view?
Oh, there certainly is. And I think that the American Redoubt movement is part of that. The Texas sovereignty movement is part of that. And even the Tea Party movement and what it's morphed into is part of that. People naturally yearn to be free. And when they see walls going up around them, they look for an exit door. So it's just logical that people will vote with their feet. They will eventually, out of desperation, if nothing else, get political and try to force changes in government that will restore fundamental individual liberties.
There's been some great hope and also some great skepticism around the ability, whether we've passed the tipping point of individuals. You mentioned this literary reference of the H.G. Wells back to the Time Machine and the Morlocks versus the Eloi. The Eloi were basically feckless. All they knew how to do was just to consume. They did not know how to fight for anything. And so when we talk about forcing a governmental change versus in the face of a deep state that's been entrenched over the past century, what cultural and change of heart and of spirit and of willingness and of will, I guess, is necessary on the ordinary people to effectively come up against that instrument and say we're going to stand up for our freedom.
Well, it's no coincidence that the same liberals that want to institute all these social programs and transform society also want to disarm the general populace. Gun control is one of their key planks, really. And the fact that the American people are buying up guns and ammunition at a huge rate, an unprecedented rate, shows you that there's a natural reaction that's taking place. And really our real liberty teeth are firearms, privately owned firearms that the government has no idea who owns them, where they are, how much ammunition people have, where that ammunition is. Unless or until the government can get that within their grasp, they can't win. So I strongly recommend your listeners, if they haven't already, to arm themselves. And if possible, there are still 34 states where you can buy guns privately on the secondary market with no paper trail whatsoever. Buy up those guns and ammunition to match. I know ammunition is incredibly hard to find right now. And for the folks that are in those other states, other than those 34 states, they ought to look at pre-1899 guns, because in most of those states, you can still buy those privately. And a lot of those antique guns are free of all government controls, and you can legally buy them with cash with no paper trail. And again, anonymity is your friend.
In the contrast to anonymity, if we could touch again on central bank digital currencies as kind of the climactic, kind of the last nail in the coffin that you mentioned in the Great Reset plan, is to take away people's ability to transact or to either hold the fruits of their labor or to transact with any sense of privacy. What alternative? Well, first of all, if you want to talk a little bit more about aspects of that, please do. What signs of it that you see?
I'm in the Austrian School of Economics, and I believe in hard money. And it's encouraging to see so many people in the Patriot movement and just the conservatives in general talking about setting up things like farmers markets and barter markets where they can interact at a real basic level to transact their business with each other. Private networks, very private exchanges. And so that even if a digital currency is forced upon us, people will still be able to barter. And the main mechanism there will probably be silver. And in particular, I'm a big believer in pre-1965 American silver coinage. That's dimes, quarters, half dollars, and even though they're a bit more expensive per ounce, silver dollars. In fact, I'm, as of the 1st of July, switching the pricing for my catalog of antique guns. I run a side business called Elk Creek Company. I'm transforming my catalog into all silver prices. So everything will be denominated in pre-1965 coinage. And then if people want to pay in Federal Reserve notes, I'll just post a multiplier, and it'll be automatically calculated on checkout that if they want to pay in FRNs, that's fine. But right now, that means paying 19.6 times more than you'd be paying in silver. And that, of course, is all based on the specie value of the silver coinage itself. In a $1,000 face value bag of silver coins with typical wear, some of the coins are going to be brand new, some are going to be used, you end up with about 715 ounces of silver. And if you just simply multiply 715 by the current spot price of silver, that gives you the net value of $1,000 of face value of dimes, quarters, or half dollars. And then that ends up, if you knock off 3 zeros, that ends up being your multiplier for when you price everything in silver coinage to FRNs, to Federal Reserve notes.
I noticed you mentioned spot price in your calculation, just to remind you that that's also a number that's controlled by very concentrated hands, and that actually junk silver is changing hands at maybe closer to 24 or 25 times face value currently at the physical level.
Right. At least if we go into an era of mass inflation, which I think we will before they institute a currency reform, including going cashless. If you price things in silver, you're at least basically protected from inflation. The multiplier simply goes up.
Mm-hmm. And that makes it obvious where the real reliable versus unreliable currency is.
Exactly. And if nothing else, it's a great object lesson for people when you say, okay, that gun will be $100. If you're going to pay in Federal Reserve notes, it's $2,000 or $2,500 or whatever the multiplier is. And you're absolutely right that the spot price of silver is manipulated. It's a very thin market, and the pit traders in Chicago really, by following the buy and sell orders of the powers that be, can very heavily manipulate the price of silver. But the real world value of silver really has never changed.
So the other thing you mentioned was forming local trading communities. So when people have farmers markets in their area, when they have community supported agriculture or CSAs, when they have local people who are beekeepers producing local honey, they have people that are producing beef or chicken or whatever. The time is now to make those relationships, find those outfits out and establish relationships with them, because as you mentioned, when the crackdown comes and we all have to be transacting officially in central bank digital currency, you want to be already on the inside with people who you know and who trust you, and your ability to continue your life unheeded with them. My wife and I often have gone on getaways to central Ohio where there's large Amish and Mennonite communities, and every time that we go back there, they look more and more reasonable, and we look more and more unreasonable coming in from the outside world.
Well, you're absolutely right. The same barter networks that will be so important for buying things like firearms and ammunition will be very important for buying food. And the same government that's going to say you can't have these guns or you can't have this much ammunition may very soon, in a time of scarcity, say you can only buy this amount of this amount of food for your family. So with a fully transparent cryptocurrency, they'll know exactly how much food you're buying. And it's only if you're going to be able to transact privately, opaquely, with silver, or bartering ammunition, or bartering other forms of food, or bartering labor, or whatever, that you're going to be able to stock up for your family in the long term. Because here, the end game here is perhaps decades long. And if you want to maintain a deep larder for your family, the only way you're going to be able to do that privately is through barter and through silver coinage or other reasonable barter currencies, because otherwise the government's going to know exactly how much food anyone has on hand at any given time. And if you look back at the history of the 20th century, governments in times of crises tend to get very grabby, whether it's guns, ammunition, food, fuel, or even labor. In the extreme cases where they were herding people onto cattle cars and trucking them off to work in prison factories.
A couple examples of things that augment what you just talked about in the future of central bank digital currencies. There's also talk that those could be expiring. That's even been tested out in China, I understand, or in Japan. And that is that you'll get issued credits, but those credits expire. They have an expiration date, just like a coupon. So it forces you to go out and spend now, because you will not be able to save. So you can't save up for the future in the currency because it isn't suitable for that. We have the principle you mentioned about going and meeting in local network communities, meeting the producers, food producers, people who know how to make things and repair things that are local to you. That idea of going to the source rather than going through the central, distribution centers, the power centers, is a principle for freedom as well. We have a question from a viewer, PV, who says, if companies like Apple and Tesla start acquiring long-term contracts with producers directly, what happens to the COMEX/COMEX, and how will precious metals be evaluated? We have a corollary to that's actually been happening. We interviewed Rick Rule, the CEO formerly of Sprott Asset Management, talking about how Sprott acquired 50 million ounces of silver over the past year or so, and they did it not by buying it off the exchanges, but by establishing relationships directly with through the network of refiners and so on, who would have made that metal available to the COMEX or the LBMA, to major exchanges, but they bought it before it ever got there. So those who are in the know are getting theirs before, without having to get in line at the official exchanges.
I think we'll see a lot more of that going on. And if you look at some of the more forward-thinking investors, people like Kyle Bass, who is a hedge fund manager in Texas, and look at the way he's operated, often it's informal hedging that's going on, and hedging in non-traditional means. Like Kyle Bass bought like $20 million worth of nickels, and he did that 10 years ago. So I think that the forms of hedging that are going to go on, both at the investor level and at just the personal basic family unit level, are going to require personal relationships with producers. In the case of precious metals, we're talking either working with refiners or minters, or and rather than buying things mail order with a paper trail, using a credit card or a check that's all going to be tracked, finding local sources like pawn shops, for example, where you can walk in, pay cash, walk out anonymously, with no real paper trail of what you're walking out with. Now, of course, some of that privacy is going to go away if we go cashless. But even after that happens, if you already have the relationships with dealers like that, that's your entree, that's your open door to later doing full-on barter transactions where you're trading labor or trading ammunition or umpteen other barter goods to continue to be able to make transactions and acquire things like small silver.
Yep. And to people who are looking to cryptocurrencies as being the salvation of restoring democracy and privacy and that sort of thing, we've got already announced, and I could put a link to it in this description of this video, already announced a proposal from the Biden administration saying that they're going to consider Bitcoin or any crypto asset that's taken in as payment by an enterprise to be a cash equivalent, and therefore subject to the Form 8300 $10,000 cash reporting ban. So, another side effect we haven't often talked about when we talk about the stealth tax and the stealth effects of inflation, we've talked about how it hurts earners and savers and retirees. What we haven't talked about is how it hurts privacy, inflation itself, because by driving the nominal price, as you mentioned, with antique guns or anything else, the nominal price of things higher and higher, even though the thing itself is not changing, it forces, again, another stealth tax, which is absurd capital gains, that you're being taxed on capital gains that never really actually happened. It's just that they devalue the measuring stick. But also it's forcing you to trip certain levels, alternative minimum tax, but in this case, $8,300, $10,000 cash ban reporting.
Right. Not only do you have tax bracket creep, you also have CTR reporting creep, because say I'm selling an antique gun, and that gun was a $500 gun in the year 2000, but by the year 2024, it becomes a $5,000 gun. Then if barter transactions are more heavily tracked and taxed and reportable, and silver transactions or Bitcoin transactions become reportable more universally, the threshold of reaching a $10,000 limit is going to be reached with smaller and smaller transactions.
Exactly.
In the end game of all of this, of course, with mass inflation, is we'll all be millionaires, but we'll be poor. Okay, and triggering a $10,000 limit is going to become more and more trivial as time goes on. I'm not a big believer in private crypto strictly because I believe that governments hate competition. And once they have their own sovereign cryptos, they are going to very heavily tax and track and penalize people holding private crypto. So if nothing else, I warn your listeners, don't have more than 10% of your net worth in cryptos, and do not hold that in crypto exchanges, because that is the nexus point where governments are going to get grabby. You need to buy yourself a crypto hard wallet. And by that, I mean like a Trezor wallet. And get your crypto out of the exchanges. If you already have a hardware wallet, you may want to bifurcate your crypto investing into really two worlds: the incredibly private world of a crypto wallet versus an incredibly public world of crypto that's held in exchanges. Gradually work your way out of the exchanges. Spend that crypto, invest that crypto in hard assets or whatever. But then the crypto that you have in a hardware wallet, keep that close to your chest. Okay, that's really your core holding that you really should never touch, and that is much more private. That's the more opaque form of crypto, because within 3 or 4 years, I think they're going to be basically making it illegal for people to hold crypto. And what you have in exchanges, they're going to force people to transfer into sovereign cryptos. And then anything that you still have in a hardware wallet, that's your get out of Dodge holding of crypto in case you ever have to get on a boat or get on an airplane and get out of the country.
Jim, before we let you go, where can people find more about your work? And if they want to get plugged in, you've already mentioned you have several resources, both from information standpoint and merchandise.
Oh, sure. For the last 15 years, I've run survivalblog.com. It's kind of the premier blog on all things preparedness. It has very deep archives that are fully searchable, free of charge. Again, it's survivalblog.com. And my side business is elkcreekcompany.net. And there I sell antique guns. These are pre-1899 guns that require no paperwork in most states. And as of July 1st, 2021, all my pricing is going to be denominated in pre-1965 silver coinage. Again, that's elkcreekcompany.net.
And I forgot to ask you this earlier, but if you could go back and hit it, any contact about strategic relocation?
Sure. For anyone who wants to relocate, my eldest son, Jonathan, runs survivalrealty.com. And that is strictly an advertising site. It does attach to a brokerage, but most of what goes on there is simply just advertisements, either for sale by owner or by agents, for properties that are suitable for survival retreats, and they don't charge any commissions for the basic advertisements there. If you're looking for property that's truly retreat worthy, survival ready, in lightly populated areas, with good sources of water and fuel and good topsoil, that's the place to look. Again, it's survivalrealty.com.
We've been speaking with Jim Rawles, the founder of survivalblog.com, again here on Liberty and Finance. Jim, just thank you for joining us. And folks, if you don't want to miss a single interview with Jim or any of our guests, make sure you go to libertyandfinance.com. In the left-hand margin, you can put your name and email address in and click submit. You will get a confirmation email. You need to confirm it, got to opt in, but you'll be on our all free email newsletter. You want to receive that because it has links to all of our interviews, descriptions of all of them, all the websites and resources that any of our guests mention, correct spelling of everything, so you don't have to be scrambling and writing stuff down during the interviews. You'll find that all in our free newsletter. It'll come to your inbox, and all you got to do is sign up. Jim, thank you for joining us again here on Liberty and Finance. On behalf of all of our guests, all of our viewers, we just appreciate you always being in our corner.
Thank you so much, and God bless you and your listeners.
This is Dunnigan Kaiser, founder of Liberty and Finance. I'm now a licensed gold and silver broker for Miles Franklin. Call me directly for the physical gold and silver that you need at the best price with personalized private service from one of the oldest and best companies in the business. 31 years strong, A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, 0 complaints, licensed and bonded. For physical delivery, vault storage, or precious metals IRAs, excellent prices, privacy, and confidentiality. Pay by check, money order, ACH, bank wire, or Bitcoin. Satisfaction guaranteed. For fastest service, just call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 888-81-LIBERTY. And either I or one of my sons and fellow brokers will call you back as soon as we can and understand your needs.